Hey everyone, tonight we explore a world where the relentless march of history took an unimaginable turn. Imagine, if you will, the scent of salt and cedar mingling with the dust of conquest, not in the familiar streets of Rome, but in the triumphant wake of elephants. Close your eyes and picture a world where the very heart of the Roman Republic, its indomitable spirit, was broken not by slow decay, but by the swift, decisive genius of a single man. A world where the Punic tongue, not Latin, became the language of power, and the great trading fleets of Carthage, not Roman legions, shaped the destinies of continents. We're about to embark on a journey through a continuous present, a persistent past, where the shadow of Hannibal, instead of being a fleeting terror, became the enduring dawn of a new global order. Before we fully immerse ourselves in this unbroken timeline, if you find yourself drawn to these whispers of what-ifs and the untold stories of alternate histories, consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel. Only if you genuinely enjoy this kind of journey, of course. And I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. It's always fascinating to imagine us all scattered across the globe, sharing in these quiet moments of historical reimagining. The Unthinkable Victory, 216 BCE to 200 BCE. Our story begins not with a gradual divergence, but with a single cataclysmic event that shattered the very foundation of the Roman Republic. The year is 216 BCE, and the sun beats down mercilessly on the plains of Cannae. In our history, this was Rome's greatest military disaster, but one from which it eventually recovered. In this alternate timeline, however, the defeat was not merely devastating, it was absolute, and the subsequent Roman response was irrevocably different. At Cannae, Hannibal Barca, with his brilliant tactical genius, executed his double envelopment with even greater precision. The Roman consular armies, numbering over 80,000 men, were not just routed, they were annihilated to an unprecedented degree. The two consuls, Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro, both perished on the field, along with an even larger proportion of the Roman senatorial and equestrian classes. The sheer scale of the loss, the utter decimation of Rome's military and political elite, left the Republic in a state of profound existential shock. In our history, Hannibal hesitated, believing Rome would negotiate. In this reality, the psychological impact of Cannae was so profound, the Roman was so utterly broken, that Hannibal sensed the moment. He did not delay. Instead of marching south to Capua, he turned his hardened, victorious army directly towards the heart of the Republic. The path to Rome lay open, stripped bare of its defenders. The news of Cannae reached Rome like a death knell. Panic gripped the city. The Senate, depleted and demoralized, struggled to raise new legions. Every able-bodied man had been sent to Cannae, and now few remained. The city's defenses, while formidable in theory, were designed to withstand a siege, not an immediate assault by a victorious army led by a commander of Hannibal's caliber. The walls, though thick, were manned by a handful of raw recruits, old men and slaves. Hannibal's march to Rome was swift and brutal. Along the way, towns and cities that had remained loyal to Rome, seeing the utter collapse of Roman power, began to defect. The Samnites, the Lucanians, the Bruttians, and even some of the Campanian cities, long chafing under Roman dominance, opened their gates to the Carthaginian general, offering supplies and even auxiliary troops. They saw not a foreign invader, but a liberator from Roman oppression. The siege of Rome itself was short but terrifying. Hannibal's elephants, symbols of his might, were brought to the very gates, their trumpeting echoing through the terrified city. The Roman populace, accustomed to victory, now faced an enemy at their very doorstep, an enemy who had systematically destroyed every army sent against him. The remaining Roman leaders, including the aged Quintus Fabius Maximus, recognized the futility of resistance. Prolonged siege would only lead to starvation and a more brutal end. The fall of Rome was not a total massacre, but a strategic capitulation. The Senate, or what remained of it, offered terms of surrender. Hannibal, ever the pragmatist, accepted. His goal was not annihilation, but the dismantling of Roman power and the reestablishment of Carthaginian hegemony in the Mediterranean. The terms were harsh. Rome was disarmed, its formidable fleet seized, its treasury plundered, and its institutions dismantled. The Roman Senate was dissolved, replaced by a Carthaginian military governor and a puppet council of compliant Roman aristocrats. The proud Roman citizens became subjects of Carthage, their lands subject to tribute, their young men conscripted into auxiliary units for the Punic army. The fate of Roman leadership was swift and decisive. Publius Cornelius Scipio, the young man who would become Africanus in our timeline, was captured during the chaos, or perhaps fled into exile, his destiny irrevocably altered. The remaining Roman legions scattered across Italy and beyond, cut off from their command, disintegrated, or were hunted down. Some fled to Sicily, others to Gaul, but their power was broken. Carthage's internal response to the news of Rome's fall was one of unparalleled elation and immense relief. The Barcid faction, led by Hannibal's family, rose to absolute, undisputed power, their long-held vision of Punic dominance finally realized. The Suffets, the elected magistrates of Carthage, now served under the formidable influence of the Barcid generals. The Council of 104, the powerful Carthaginian oligarchy, while still influential, found itself increasingly aligned with the military's agenda. The Punic peace imposed on Italy was a harsh one. Roman citizens were stripped of their civic rights, their lands often confiscated and redistributed to loyal Carthaginian allies or veterans. Latin, though still spoken, began its slow decline as the language of power and administration replaced by Punic. Carthage, the great mercantile power, now had to learn the complexities of governing a vast land empire, a challenge it approached with its characteristic pragmatism and focus on economic exploitation. The Mediterranean, once contested, was now truly a Punic lake. The Punic Ascendancy and Mediterranean Reshaping, 200 BCE to 100 BCE. With Rome subdued, Carthage embarked on the monumental task of consolidating its newfound power. The immediate aftermath of conquest saw a systematic dismantling of Roman influence across Italy. Roman infrastructure, the famed roads and aqueducts, were not destroyed, but repurposed, now serving the needs of the Punic administration and facilitating the movement of Carthaginian goods and troops. Garrisons of Punic soldiers, often drawn from Hannibal's loyal veterans and allied contingents, were established in key Italian cities, ensuring compliance. Carthage's primary focus shifted to solidifying its control over Italy, transforming it from a conquered land into a productive asset. The fertile plains of Campania and the rich agricultural lands of the Po Valley became vital food baskets for the burgeoning Punic Empire. Roman agricultural techniques were adapted and improved upon, often by incorporating North African and Phoenician methods, leading to increased yields. Crucially, Carthage embarked on an ambitious program of naval expansion. Its existing fleet, already formidable, was rebuilt and expanded, using captured Roman shipyards and the vast timber resources of Italy. Within a generation, Carthage was the undisputed master of the Mediterranean. Its war fleets patrolled every sea lane, enforcing Punic trade laws and deterring any nascent resistance. Its merchant fleets, laden with goods from across its growing sphere of influence, plied the waters unmolested, cementing Carthage's economic supremacy. The vacuum left by Rome's fall allowed Carthage to expand its influence into former Roman spheres. Sicily and Sardinia, long contested, were now firmly reclaimed and fully integrated into the Carthaginian heartland. Their strategic ports and rich agricultural lands became vital components of the Punic economy. Iberia, the source of much of Hannibal's wealth and manpower, saw Carthaginian control solidified. The vast silver mines of Hispania fueled the Punic treasury, providing the resources for further expansion and the maintenance of a powerful military. New Punic cities and trading posts were established along the coasts and rivers, facilitating the extraction and transport of wealth. Gaul, which in our timeline would have been conquered by Caesar, remained largely independent of direct Carthaginian rule. Instead, Carthage established a strong sphere of influence through extensive trade networks and strategic alliances with powerful Celtic tribes. Punic merchants brought goods and ideas deep into Gaul, and Celtic warriors often served as highly valued mercenaries in the Punic armies, creating a symbiotic relationship that prevented any other power from rising in the region. Greece and Macedon experienced a different fate. Without Roman intervention, the Hellenistic kingdoms continued their internecine struggles. Carthage, through shrewd diplomacy and a subtle military presence, positioned itself as a protector of Greek city-states, particularly those with valuable ports and trade routes. Punic gold and naval power often tipped the balance in local conflicts, preventing any single Hellenistic power from dominating the Aegean. This ensured a fragmented but economically open Greece, ripe for Carthaginian trade. Egypt, under the Ptolemaic dynasty, remained independent but increasingly reliant on Carthaginian trade. Alexandria, with its famed library and intellectual centers, became a vital cultural and economic partner for Carthage, facilitating the exchange of knowledge and goods between Africa and the East. Cultural blending became a defining characteristic of this new Punic-dominated world. Punic language and culture, with its Semitic roots and strong mercantile traditions, became dominant in the West. Latin, stripped of its imperial power, persisted as a regional language in parts of Italy, perhaps even evolving into various local dialects, but it was no longer the language of government or high culture. It became a language of the conquered, a historical curiosity. Greek, however, remained strong in the East, particularly in the Hellenistic kingdoms and Egypt, serving as the lingua franca of scholarship and much of the Eastern trade. This created a fascinating linguistic divide, with Punic dominating the West and Greek the East, both interacting with a multitude of local vernaculars. Religion also underwent a transformation. The Punic deities, Baal-Hamon, the chief god, often associated with fertility and the sun, and Tanit, the chief goddess, associated with the moon, fertility, and war, gained prominence across the conquered territories. Their worship was often syncretized with local gods. Roman gods, stripped of their state patronage, faded or were absorbed into the Punic pantheon, their rituals either abandoned or subtly altered. The practice of child sacrifice, a historical aspect of Punic religion, might have continued in some form, or gradually diminished under the influence of other cultures and evolving societal norms, perhaps becoming a symbolic rather than literal act. The economic system of the Punic Empire was fundamentally mercantile. Carthage's vast trade networks expanded globally, reaching far beyond the traditional Mediterranean routes. New Carthaginian coinage, minted from the silver of Iberia and the gold of newly explored African mines, became the standard currency across the known world. The suffets, the elected magistrates of Carthage, now served under the formidable influence of the Barcid generals, who, having achieved their military goals, turned their attention to consolidating economic power. The Council of 104, the powerful Carthaginian oligarchy of wealthy merchants and landowners, adapted to imperial rule, becoming more centralized and less purely mercantile, overseeing the vast economic machinery of the empire. This was an empire built on trade, wealth, and naval power, rather than solely on land conquest and agricultural exploitation. The Punic thalassocracy, 100 BCE, 100 CE. With the Mediterranean firmly under its control, Carthage, the quintessential mercantile power, began to truly define itself as a thalassocracy, an empire built on naval supremacy and global trade. The focus shifted from mere conquest to the strategic establishment of trading posts, resource extraction sites, and secure maritime routes that stretched far beyond the familiar shores of the Mediterranean. Carthage's unparalleled naval power allowed it to establish trade routes that reached the farthest corners of the known world and beyond. The bustling port of Carthage, with its circular military harbor and rectangular commercial harbor, became the undisputed center of global commerce. Ships laden with goods from Africa, Iberia, Italy, and the East constantly arrived and departed, transforming the city into the wealthiest and most cosmopolitan metropolis on Earth. African interior. Punic explorers and merchants ventured deep into the African interior, following ancient trade routes and forging new ones. They established permanent trading posts along the Niger River and across the Sahara, exchanging manufactured goods, salt, and Mediterranean luxuries for gold, ivory, exotic animals, and new agricultural products. This systematic exploration and economic integration of Africa provided immense wealth and resources, fundamentally altering the continent's development. New Punic African cities emerged as hubs of commerce and cultural exchange. Atlantic exploration, building on their ancient Phoenician heritage of daring seamanship, Punic mariners embarked on ambitious voyages along the Atlantic coast. They established trading outposts along the West African coast, reaching as far south as the Gulf of Guinea. More importantly, propelled by a combination of curiosity, the pursuit of new trade goods, and perhaps even accidental drift, Punic ships ventured further west into the vast, unknown Atlantic. While not a sudden discovery in the vein of Columbus, there were increasing hints of early contact with the Americas. Fishermen and explorers reported strange currents, new star constellations, and the occasional sighting of unfamiliar landmasses or artifacts. These initial contacts were likely sporadic, leading to the exchange of a few goods or ideas, but not yet large-scale colonization. Eastern trade. Carthage bypassed many of the traditional land routes to the east by establishing direct maritime trade with India and potentially even China. Punic merchant fleets sailed the Red Sea, navigated the Arabian Sea, and ventured into the Indian Ocean, establishing direct trade links with the powerful kingdoms of India. Spices, silks, precious stones, and exotic goods flowed directly into Carthaginian markets, enriching the empire and fostering cultural exchange. While direct voyages to China were rare, Punic merchants established intermediaries in India and Southeast Asia, ensuring a steady supply of coveted Chinese goods. Punic law, a sophisticated legal system, evolved to govern this vast and complex mercantile empire. While it retained its Phoenician roots, emphasizing contracts, property rights, and commercial regulations, it also subtly incorporated elements from Greek and even remnants of Roman law, particularly in areas of public administration and provincial governance. This codified legal system, fundamentally Punic in its spirit, was applied across the empire, providing a stable framework for trade and justice. Disputes between merchants from different provinces were settled in Punic courts, reinforcing the central authority. Urban development flourished under Punic Ascendancy. Carthage itself became a sprawling metropolis, its population swelling with merchants, artisans, and laborers from across the empire. Its multi-story buildings, grand temples dedicated to Baal Hammon and Tanit, and bustling marketplaces reflected its immense wealth and cosmopolitan nature. New cities were founded as strategic trading hubs along vital routes, from the Atlantic coast of Iberia to the fertile lands of Italy and the bustling ports of North Africa. These cities, planned with Punic efficiency, featured impressive harbor facilities, extensive warehouses, and well-organized commercial districts. Intellectual growth thrived in this environment of wealth and exchange. Punic scholars, drawing on the vast accumulated knowledge of Phoenician navigation and mathematics, Greek philosophy and science, and Egyptian astronomy and medicine, made significant advancements. They developed sophisticated methods for cartography, improving maps of the known world and charting new territories. Astronomy was advanced for navigation, leading to more accurate celestial observations. Engineering focused on maritime technologies, hydraulic systems for port management, and advanced construction techniques for large-scale urban projects. While perhaps less focused on abstract philosophy than the Greeks, Punic thought was pragmatic and innovative, driven by the needs of a global trading empire. The great libraries of Carthage, Alexandria, and other Punic-influenced cities became repositories of global knowledge. The Punic military during this era maintained its focus on naval power, ensuring the security of trade routes and projecting force across the seas. Highly trained mercenary armies, drawn from diverse peoples across the empire, Numidians, Iberians, Gauls, and even former Romans, supplemented by loyal provincial troops, provided the land defense. Elephants, though perhaps less central to battlefield tactics than in Hannibal's time, remained a powerful symbol of Punic might and were still deployed in ceremonial roles or for specific siege operations. The Punic peace was enforced by the omnipresent threat of its formidable navy and its well-disciplined land forces. Challenges and transformations. 100 CE to 400 CE. The Punic thalassocracy, while seemingly invincible, faced the inherent challenges of managing a vast, diverse empire spanning multiple continents. The period from 100 CE to 400 CE was one of continuous adaptation, marked by internal pressures and the emergence of new external dynamics. Internal stability remained a constant concern. Governing such a sprawling and culturally varied domain required immense administrative skill. Provincial revolts, though generally localized, were not uncommon, particularly from regions with strong independent traditions or those that had been more recently subdued. Former Roman territories in Italy, still harboring resentment, occasionally saw localized uprisings, often met with swift and decisive Punic military responses. The Carthaginian approach to governance was pragmatic: maintain order, ensure trade flows, and collect tribute. While not as focused on cultural assimilation as Rome, Punic law and administration gradually permeated all levels of society, creating a common framework for commerce and justice. The Council of 104, the ruling oligarchy, became more sophisticated in its administrative oversight, developing a complex bureaucratic system to manage the empire's vast resources and diverse populations. External threats continued to test Punic strength. Germanic migrations on the northern borders of the Punic sphere of influence, particularly in Gaul and along the Rhine, Germanic tribes began to exert pressure. Carthage, learning from Rome's earlier mistakes, employed different strategies. Instead of rigid defensive lines, they focused on a combination of strategic trade agreements, alliances with powerful tribal confederations, and controlled settlement of certain groups as federates, offering land in exchange for military service. This often created buffer zones, absorbing the migratory pressures and channeling Germanic manpower into the Punic military machine. This approach, while not eliminating all conflict, largely prevented the widespread devastation seen in our timeline. Parthia, Persia. In the east, the Punic Empire continued its rivalry with the powerful Parthian Empire, and later the resurgent Sassanid Persian Empire. These were primarily economic and diplomatic contests for control of trade routes and influence in the Levant and Mesopotamia. While border skirmishes and proxy wars occurred, large-scale empire-shaking conflicts were rare. Carthage's naval dominance in the Persian Gulf and Red Sea gave it a distinct advantage in projecting power and maintaining trade links in the east. New African powers. Deep within Africa, beyond the immediate Carthaginian sphere, powerful new kingdoms and confederations emerged. Carthage, rather than seeking to conquer them outright, often established diplomatic relations, trade agreements, and even military alliances, recognizing the mutual benefits of peaceful commerce. This led to a more complex and interconnected African continent, with a network of Punic-influenced states and trading partners. The rise of Christianity presented a unique challenge to the Punic polytheistic system. Christianity, originating in the Levant, spread across the Mediterranean, including into Punic territories. Unlike the Roman Empire, which initially persecuted Christians for their refusal to worship the emperor, Carthage's reaction was more varied. While some Punic authorities saw Christians as a disruptive force, particularly their rejection of traditional Punic deities and their emphasis on a single, exclusive god, widespread, systematic persecution was less common. The Punic focus on trade and pragmatism often led to a more tolerant, albeit wary, approach. Christianity might have spread more slowly in a Punic world, or perhaps adapted differently, integrating aspects of Punic religious symbolism or practices. It might have remained a significant minority religion, or perhaps even been absorbed into a broader syncretic spiritual movement, rather than becoming the dominant state religion. The Punic pantheon, with its emphasis on powerful, often abstract deities, might have proven more resilient to monotheistic challenges. Technological progress continued, but perhaps at a different pace and with a different focus than in our Roman timeline. While Roman ingenuity often centered on grand public works and military logistics, Punic innovation was more directed towards maritime technology, efficient resource extraction, and sophisticated commercial practices. Advancements in shipbuilding, navigation, and port infrastructure were continuous. The development of new mining techniques, improved agricultural tools, and more efficient methods of manufacturing goods for trade were prioritized. While not experiencing a sudden industrial revolution, there was a steady, incremental improvement in various technologies driven by the demands of a vast mercantile empire. Cultural shifts continued to shape the empire. Punic culture became deeply entrenched as the dominant force in the West, influencing everything from architecture to social customs. Latin faded further, becoming a largely academic language studied by scholars interested in the history of the fallen Roman Republic. Greek remained strong in the East, particularly in the Hellenistic cities, serving as the language of philosophy, science, and much of the lucrative Eastern trade. This linguistic and cultural duality, with Punic dominating the Western Mediterranean and Greek the Eastern, created a rich tapestry of intellectual and artistic expression. The Punic language itself evolved, incorporating loanwords from Greek, Berber, and other languages, becoming a sophisticated tongue for commerce, administration, and literature. Economic cycles were a natural part of this vast empire. Periods of immense prosperity, fueled by new trade routes and resource discoveries, were interspersed with occasional recessions caused by overextension, natural disasters, or regional conflicts. However, the inherent resilience of a diversified mercantile economy, coupled with a pragmatic ruling oligarchy, allowed Carthage to weather these storms more effectively than a purely agrarian or military-focused empire might have. The Punic state, unlike the later Roman Empire, was not burdened by a vast, unproductive bureaucracy or an over-reliance on a single economic sector. The Punic Golden Age, 400 to 800 CE. The period from 400 CE to 800 CE marked the true zenith of Punic power and influence, an era that, in our timeline, would be known as the Dark Ages. In this alternate reality, however, it was a Punic Golden Age, a long period of relative peace, immense prosperity, and continuous cultural and technological advancement. The stability provided by a unified mercantile empire allowed for an unprecedented flourishing of civilization. At its height, Punic influence extended across continents, not just through direct rule, but through an intricate web of trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. The Mediterranean remained the heart of the empire, but its arteries stretched far beyond. Global reach. Punic merchant fleets, now larger and more advanced, plied the waters of the Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, and the Pacific. Permanent trading colonies were established along the coasts of West Africa, East Africa, and India, serving as vital nodes in the vast Punic economic network. These colonies were not merely outposts, but vibrant, self-sustaining communities, blending Punic culture with local traditions. Architectural marvels. This era saw the construction of unique Punic architectural styles, blending the monumental scale of Phoenician and Egyptian traditions with the refined aesthetics of Greek design and the pragmatic engineering of the Punic mind. Grand temples dedicated to Baal Hammon and Tanit, soaring multi-story public buildings, and intricate harbor complexes became hallmarks of Punic cities. The use of advanced hydraulic systems for water management, sophisticated sewage systems, and even early forms of climate control, utilizing natural ventilation and water features, made Punic urban centers remarkably livable and hygienic, far surpassing anything seen in our own medieval period. The city of Carthage itself, with its towering ziggurat-like temples and bustling multi-tiered commercial districts, was a wonder of the world. Philosophical schools. Punic philosophy, while perhaps less focused on abstract metaphysics than the Greeks, flourished with a strong emphasis on ethics, governance, and the practical application of knowledge. Schools of thought emerged that debated the ideal structure of the mercantile state, the responsibilities of the citizen, and the pursuit of wisdom through trade and exploration. There might have been philosophical currents emphasizing the interconnectedness of all things through commerce, or the spiritual significance of the natural world and its resources. Exploration of the Americas confirmed. The sporadic contacts of earlier centuries now blossomed into more significant and sustained voyages. Punic expeditions, equipped with advanced navigation techniques and larger, more robust ships, systematically explored the coastlines of the Americas. While not leading to immediate mass colonization, permanent trading posts and small self-sufficient Punic settlements were established along the eastern seaboard of what would be our North and South America. This led to a significant Columbian exchange centuries earlier than in our timeline, with new crops like maize, potatoes, and tomatoes being introduced to the Punic world, revolutionizing agriculture and leading to population booms. In return, Punic technologies, domesticated animals, and diseases with devastating consequences for indigenous populations, though perhaps mitigated by a more gradual and less aggressive initial contact, were introduced to the Americas. The Punic peace became a global reality, enforced by the omnipresent Punic naval power and a sophisticated network of economic interdependence. Large-scale international warfare was largely suppressed. Conflicts were more often localized trade disputes or regional rebellions, swiftly contained by the Punic military. This long period of stability allowed for an unprecedented flow of goods, ideas, and people across continents, fostering a truly interconnected world. Crucially, the Punic Dark Ages were entirely averted. The continuous existence of a powerful, centralized empire meant that knowledge was not lost, but actively preserved, studied, and built upon. Libraries, academies, and centers of learning in Carthage, Alexandria, and other major cities continued to be vibrant hubs of intellectual activity. The intellectual traditions of the ancient world, from Phoenician mathematics to Greek philosophy and Egyptian medicine, were seamlessly integrated and advanced. There was no widespread regression in technology or culture. Instead, a steady incremental progression characterized these centuries. The Punic world was a beacon of continuous civilization. The Age of Innovation and Interconnectedness, 800 to 1400 CE. The Punic Golden Age flowed seamlessly into an era of accelerated innovation and unprecedented global interconnectedness, a period that, in our timeline, would encompass the European High Middle Ages and early Renaissance. In this Punic world, however, the intellectual and technological advancements were built upon a continuous, unbroken foundation. Technological leaps. Printing. The concept of movable type, perhaps inspired by existing block printing techniques from the East, or developed independently by a Punic scholar, emerged around the 10th or 11th century. This Punic press revolutionized the dissemination of knowledge. Books, scrolls, and maps were produced in vast quantities, primarily in Punic and Greek, but also in other local languages, accelerating literacy and intellectual exchange across the empire. This was not a renaissance of lost knowledge, but an amplification of existing, continuously developing understanding. Gunpowder, adopted from the East, likely through extensive trade contacts with Chinese and Indian merchants, gunpowder technology was quickly integrated into Punic military strategy. Punic engineers developed sophisticated cannons and early firearms, revolutionizing siege warfare and naval combat. This gave the Punic military an even greater advantage over any potential rivals. Navigation. Building on centuries of maritime expertise, Punic scholars and engineers made significant advancements in navigation. New instruments, such as improved astrolabes and magnetic compasses, perhaps adapted from Chinese designs, allowed for more accurate celestial navigation and charting. Sophisticated cartography, combining astronomical observations with detailed surveys from their extensive voyages, led to remarkably accurate world maps, far surpassing anything available in our own medieval period. Shipbuilding techniques continued to evolve, producing faster, larger, and more seaworthy vessels capable of long-distance oceanic voyages. The Punic Renaissance. This was not a rebirth, but a sustained period of intellectual and artistic vigor, deeply rooted in Punic values. The focus was on practical application, maritime exploration, engineering, and philosophical inquiry into the nature of governance and commerce. Punic scholars debated ethics, trade law, and the optimal administration of a global empire. Art and architecture continued to evolve, blending Punic aesthetics with influences from the diverse cultures of their vast trade network. Elaborate mosaics, intricate metalwork, and grand public sculptures adorned Punic cities, reflecting their wealth and cosmopolitanism. Rise of new powers, or lack thereof. Without the fragmentation of Europe into competing nation-states, the global political map was vastly different. The powerful European kingdoms of our timeline simply did not exist. Instead, these regions were well-integrated Punic provinces, contributing to the overall strength of the empire. However, new powers did emerge, though often in cooperation or competition with Carthage rather than as existential threats. Perhaps a powerful and unified African kingdom in the interior, or a distinct, technologically advanced civilization in the Americas, developed in parallel, engaging in complex diplomatic and trade relations with the Punic Empire. The Chinese dynasties continued their own cycles of rise and fall, interacting with Carthage primarily through maritime trade. The Islamic Caliphate, analog. The rise of Islam as a distinct religious and political force would be profoundly altered if a similar monotheistic movement emerged in the Arabian Peninsula. It would face a vastly different geopolitical landscape. A strong, unified Punic Empire with established control over North Africa, Egypt, and parts of the Levant would be a formidable barrier to rapid expansion. The Islamic Caliphate might be a more contained regional power, perhaps focused on the Arabian Peninsula and Mesopotamia, engaging in trade and occasional border skirmishes with the Punic Empire rather than sweeping across North Africa and Iberia. Religious and cultural exchange would still occur, but the Punic world would likely maintain its distinct religious and philosophical identity. perhaps even absorbing some Islamic intellectual advancements in mathematics and medicine without adopting the faith itself. Global trade networks became even more sophisticated and far-reaching. Punic merchant guilds, powerful and influential, controlled vast swathes of global commerce. They established intricate financial systems, including early forms of banking, credit, and insurance, to facilitate their long-distance trade. The flow of goods, spices from India, silks from China, gold from Africa, timber from Gaul, and agricultural products from Italy and the Americas, created an unprecedented level of economic interdependence across continents. The Punic Empire was not just a political entity, it was a global economic engine, constantly seeking new markets and resources. The Punic Global Empire, 1400 to 1800 CE. As the world approached what would be our early modern period, the Punic Empire stood as an unchallenged global hegemon. This era, from 1400 to 1800 CE, saw the full realization of Carthage's vision, a truly Punic global empire built on centuries of naval supremacy, economic might, and continuous innovation. Colonial expansion. Punic colonies were established on a grand scale in the Americas, parts of Africa, and Asia. Unlike the European colonial powers of our timeline, the Punic approach was often more focused on trade and resource extraction rather than mass settlement and religious conversion. While Punic administrators and merchants formed the elite, indigenous populations were often integrated into the economic system as laborers or trading partners, rather than being entirely displaced. Large plantations, worked by a mix of indigenous labor and imported enslaved peoples, a regrettable continuation of ancient practices, though perhaps evolving over time, produced valuable crops for the Punic market. New Punic cities, designed with efficient harbors and extensive warehouses, sprang up along the coasts of these new territories, serving as vital links in the global trade network. The Punic Empire's influence was felt from the Amazon basin to the coasts of Southeast Asia. Global conflicts. While the Punic Empire was dominant, it was not entirely without rivals. Wars for trade dominance or control of key resources occurred, but primarily between the Punic Empire and other major regional powers. A powerful and unified Chinese dynasty, perhaps more technologically advanced due to uninterrupted development, might have challenged Punic maritime supremacy in the Pacific. An Indian empire, rich in resources and manufacturing, could have been a formidable economic competitor. These conflicts, however, were often fought at sea or in distant colonial territories, rarely threatening the Punic heartland directly. The absence of a fragmented Europe meant no world wars as we know them. Instead, conflicts were more akin to large-scale trade wars or imperial skirmishes. The Punic Enlightenment. This period saw a flourishing of philosophical movements that debated the nature of the state, the rights of the individual, within a Punic context of civic duty and commercial freedom, and the role of knowledge in society. Punic thinkers, drawing on their long tradition of pragmatism and inquiry, explored concepts of governance, justice, and economic theory. These intellectual currents, rather than leading to revolutions against existing monarchies, often resulted in gradual reforms within the Punic oligarchy, perhaps leading to a more meritocratic system or a greater emphasis on public welfare, driven by the belief that a prosperous populace was a stable populace. Industrial precursors. Early forms of industrialization began to emerge within the Punic Empire. This was not a sudden explosion, but a gradual acceleration, driven by the demands of a global market. Innovations in textiles, mining, and metallurgy, often building on ancient techniques and incorporating new scientific understanding, led to increased production efficiency. Water power and wind power were extensively utilized, and early experiments with steam power, perhaps drawing on ancient Greek concepts, began to show promise, particularly in pumping water from mines or driving machinery in port facilities. The Punic genius for organization and logistics was perfectly suited to the challenges of large-scale manufacturing. Punic naval supremacy. The Punic fleet remained the unchallenged global naval power. Its ships, now incorporating advanced designs and eventually gunpowder weaponry, were capable of projecting power to any corner of the globe. Vast shipyards in Carthage, Gades, Cadiz, and newly established colonial ports churned out merchant vessels and warships, ensuring the continuous flow of trade and the enforcement of Punic law on the high seas. The Punic Empire was truly a thalassocracy on a global scale. Punic language and culture. Punic, having evolved over millennia, became the dominant global lingua franca for trade, diplomacy, and higher education. While local languages thrived in various provinces, Punic served as the common tongue that bound the empire together. Punic culture, a rich blend of its Phoenician roots, Greek intellectualism, North African vitality, and influences from its vast colonial territories, became a global cultural force. Punic art, literature, and music were disseminated across the world, shaping tastes and ideas. The Punic calendar, based on lunar cycles, might have become the global standard, and Punic weights and measures the international norm. The modern Punic world, 1800 CE to 2025 CE. As the world entered the 19th and 20th centuries, the Punic Empire, having navigated millennia of change, stood as a truly modern, technologically advanced, and globally interconnected civilization. This was the era of the Punic Industrial Revolution and the full blossoming of a Punic-dominated world. The Punic Industrial Revolution, unlike the fragmented, competitive industrialization of our timeline, the Punic Industrial Revolution was a more coordinated and systematic process, driven by the empire's long-standing mercantile efficiency and its vast, unified market. Steam power, then electricity, and eventually advanced forms of renewable energy, perhaps drawing on ancient Punic understanding of solar and wind power, became the engines of a global industrial complex. Vast Punic factories, often located near resource-rich colonial territories or in major urban centers, churned out goods for a global consumer base. Punic engineers, building on their continuous tradition of innovation, pioneered advancements in metallurgy, chemistry, and mechanical engineering. Global Punic influence, Punic political and economic models dominated the world. The Carthaginian system, which had evolved from an oligarchy to a more complex, perhaps federalized republic or a highly centralized technocracy, became the template for governance. While the Suffets and the Council of 104 might still exist in some form, power would likely be distributed among various administrative councils, scientific academies, and regional governors, all operating under the overarching authority of Carthage. The Punic legal system, refined over millennia, was the global standard, ensuring stability and predictability in international commerce and governance. Technological advancements. The Punic world saw its own versions of our most significant technological leaps. Transportation, Extensive railway networks crisscrossed continents, connecting vast Punic provinces. Airships and then advanced aircraft, powered by efficient engines, revolutionized long-distance travel. The seas remained the domain of powerful Punic fleets, now composed of massive, technologically advanced vessels. Communication. Telecommunications, from the telegraph to the global Punic net, their version of the Internet, connected every corner of the empire. Information flowed freely, though perhaps with imperial oversight, fostering a sense of global Punic identity. Computing. Punic scholars and engineers, building on their mathematical and logical traditions, developed advanced computing machines, leading to breakthroughs in data processing, automation, and artificial intelligence. Space travel. The Punic equivalent of the space race would have seen Punic astronauts, trained in specialized academies, being the first to reach the Moon, then Mars, and perhaps even establishing permanent orbital stations. The Punic eagle, a symbol of their enduring power, would be planted on celestial bodies. Their understanding of the universe, their medical advancements, and their artistic expressions would be the culmination of an uninterrupted intellectual tradition, constantly pushing the boundaries of knowledge. Global Punic society politics. The Punic political system, while perhaps still retaining elements of its ancient oligarchic roots, would have evolved into a sophisticated, highly efficient global administration. Debates on governance would focus on balancing centralized control with provincial autonomy, ensuring the vast empire remained cohesive. Economics. A truly globalized Punic-centric economy. Major Punic corporations with roots in ancient merchant guilds would dominate global trade, finance, and industry. The Punic dinar, or a similar global currency, would be the standard. Culture. A vibrant, dynamic blend of Punic, North African, Iberian, Italian, Greek, American, and Asian influences. Punic architecture would be characterized by soaring, elegant structures that blended ancient forms with modern materials. Art, music, and literature would reflect this global fusion, creating unique and compelling expressions. Language. Punic, in its evolved form, would be the dominant global language of commerce, science, and higher education. However, a rich tapestry of regional vernaculars would continue to thrive, reflecting the empire's immense cultural diversity. Multilingualism would be common. Religion. The ancient Punic polytheism, particularly the worship of Baal Hammon and Tanit, might have evolved into a more philosophical or syncretic system, perhaps incorporating elements of other faiths or becoming a blend of traditional reverence and rational inquiry. Or it might have remained a powerful state-supported religion, adapting to modern times. Global challenges. The Punic Empire, as the sole global superpower, would face the challenges of our own time with a unified approach. Climate change would be addressed through coordinated imperial policies, leveraging advanced Punic science and engineering to develop sustainable energy solutions and environmental conservation programs. Pandemics would be met by a global Punic health organization deploying advanced medical technologies and a vast research infrastructure. Resource scarcity would be managed through efficient global allocation and the development of new extraction and recycling technologies. The year 2025. In this alternate 2025, the world would be a testament to Hannibal's victory. The great cities, from Carthage to new metropolises in the Americas and Asia, would be marvels of urban planning with soaring architecture, automated public transport, and integrated green spaces. The air would hum with the quiet efficiency of advanced technology. The Punic language would be heard in every corner of the globe, a living legacy of a civilization that defied the odds. The great harbor of Carthage, still the bustling heart of the world, would be filled with sleek, automated cargo ships and luxurious passenger liners, connecting a truly global empire. The Punic eagle, symbol of their enduring power, would adorn buildings, vehicles, and even space stations, a constant reminder of the empire that never fell. The unseen threads of time, reflections on a Punic world. And so we leave this world where the roar of elephants echoed not in defeat, but in triumph. A world shaped by the mercantile spirit of Carthage rather than the martial might of Rome. A world where the Punic tongue, not Latin, became the language of global discourse, and the great trading fleets, not the legions, defined the boundaries of an empire. This Punic world, while achieving unprecedented global unity and technological advancement, would also have its own unique shadows. The inherent pragmatism and mercantile focus of Carthage might lead to a society where economic efficiency sometimes overshadowed individual liberties or social welfare. The absence of competing nation-states while preventing global wars might also stifle certain forms of innovation or lead to a more centralized, perhaps less diverse, cultural landscape. The integration of conquered peoples, while less brutal than some historical conquests, would still involve the suppression of independent identities and the imposition of Punic norms. The legacy of slavery, a part of Carthaginian history, might have persisted longer or evolved into new forms of labor exploitation. Yet the vision remains compelling, a world without the long, often bloody rise of European nation-states, a world where the Mediterranean remained the undisputed center of a global civilization for millennia, a world where the strategic genius of Hannibal led not to a fleeting moment of glory, but to the dawn of an enduring global empire. Let your imagination drift on these currents of what if, wondering about the paths not taken, the histories unwritten, and the profound beauty in the endless possibilities that lie just beyond the veil of our own reality.